200 invitations. With my farm's address, 200. I could barely breathe when the florist called me that morning, her cheerful voice asking about where to place the arch of red roses and the ivory tablecloths. I stood frozen with the hose still in my hand, the water running into the soil Ernest and I had tilled together. My farm, my sanctuary, was suddenly not mine at all. The humiliation hit me like a slap. My own son and his wife had planned their wedding here with 200 strangers invited, and not one word spoken to me. It wasn't just an oversight. It was as if I were invisible. As if my life's work, my sacrifice, my home, was nothing more than a free venue. I remembered the years I scrubbed other people's floors, saved every penny, and went without, so much so that one day I could hold the deed to this land. 40 years of labor for a piece of dignity. And now, without my consent, they had handed it out like party favors. But humiliation has a way of lighting a fire inside the heart. Something inside me snapped that day. The calls kept coming. The photographer confirmed his arrival time. The DJ wanted to discuss power outlets. The caterer listed a 3-course menu for 200. Each voice cut into me sharper than the last. I felt my pulse racing, my palms damp with rage. I called Daniel, my son, my blood. My last hope that maybe this was a misunderstanding. His voice was cold, distracted. "Oh, Mom, I forgot to mention it. Don't worry, it's not going to cost you anything. We're paying for everything. Just make sure the house is ready for the family after the party." The words echoed like poison. I forgot to mention it. 40 years of my sweat and tears reduced to a casual afterthought. I sat on the porch, my hands trembling, tears slipping down my face. But they weren't just tears of sadness. They burned with fury. And yet, under the pain, something unexpected stirred. A voice inside whispered, "They think you're powerless. Prove them wrong." This wasn't just another chapter in endless family drama stories. This was the moment my own story would change. I leaned back in the rocking chair Ernest had built for me, the boards creaking beneath my weight. My farm stretched before me, the mango trees, the porch with peeling white paint, the fields that once smelled of hay and fresh soil. To think they had used it all without asking me, the rage in my chest turned to steel. I wiped my face and whispered aloud, "This land has an owner, and they will learn it." The phone rang again. This time it was the bakery confirming the delivery of a 3-tier cake. My voice cracked as I told the man he had the wrong number, but inside I was no longer confused. I knew exactly what was happening. Daniel and Sophia had crossed the final line. For years I had been the silent hostess of their chaos. They barged in with friends, left bottles scattered on my lawn, let their music shake the windows, and expected me to clean it all like their servant. I told myself it was family love, that it was part of being a mother. But love without respect isn't love, it's servitude. I stood up, my knees aching, but my resolve firm. I dialed a different number this time, not my son's, not Sophia's. I called Stephen Callahan, the attorney who had helped me uncover Ernest's poisoned estate. His voice was steady, professional. "Mrs. Carter, what's going on, Stephen?" I said, my words trembling with both fury and clarity. "My son sent out 200 wedding invitations with my farm's address. Without asking me." There was a pause, and then his tone sharpened. "Did you give written consent?" "No." "Then they're trespassing before they've even arrived," he replied calmly. "You have every right to act. What do you want me to do? What did I want? I wanted justice. I wanted my son and his wife to see me not as the invisible old woman they could push aside, but as the rightful owner of this land. Prepare for a contract, I told him, my breath steadying. They'll learn the law is not just for them. It's for me too. The fury in my veins transformed into something else, power. For the first time in years, I felt like the story of my life was in my hands. And this, I told myself, wasn't just one of those family drama stories I had endured. This was my story, and I was going to write it my way. The next morning I rose before the Sunday. The sky was a pale gray, the kind of dawn that makes every sound sharper. I boiled coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and spread out the deed to my farm in front of me. The paper was slightly yellowed, but the ink of my name was bold and unshakable: Elizabeth Carter, sole owner. I ran my fingers across it like a prayer. This wasn't just land. It was every floor I had scrubbed, every shirt I had ironed, every penny I had saved. 40 years of silent humiliation had bought me this freedom. No one, not even my son, had the right to treat it as theirs. I poured another cup, calmer now. I could almost hear Ernest's voice. "Liz, you don't bow. You rise." His memory filled the kitchen, steadying me. By mid-morning, Stephen arrived. He wore his usual gray suit, neat and commanding, his briefcase clutched like a sword. We sat together on the porch, the autumn wind stirring the roses. "I've drafted a simple but powerful contract," he said, sliding papers toward me. "If you wish, you can lease the property for another event on that same date. It's perfectly legal. Their invitations mean nothing without your consent." The idea struck me like lightning. Another event, on the very day of their wedding. The humiliation they planned for me could return to them tenfold. Stephen read the disbelief in my eyes. "Do it, Elizabeth. They've treated you as if you don't exist. Show them you do. Show them the law and the world is on your side." I nodded slowly. My hands no longer trembled. "Yes. If they want a party at my farm," I said, a fierce smile pulling at my lips, "they'll have to attend the one I choose." The air itself seemed to shift. For the first time, I wasn't the woman waiting for scraps of respect. I was the woman drawing the line sharp and final. As Stephen left, promising to finalize the contract that afternoon, I looked across my fields. The wind carried the scent of earth and jasmine. For once, I wasn't afraid of the storm my children had created. I was ready to meet it. This was no longer about invitations or even a wedding. This was about dignity, about reclaiming what was mine. And I whispered into the breeze, "This isn't just another one of those family drama stories. This is the day my children learn who their mother really is." The phone would not stop ringing. Each call was another stab, another reminder that my life had been hijacked. The photographer wanted to confirm his arrival at 10 a.m. The DJ insisted on knowing where to set up his sound system. The caterer read me a list of appetizers as if I were the hostess, when in truth I was the uninvited. I clenched the receiver until my knuckles whitened. "They think I'm just the maid," I whispered to myself. The humiliation swelled in my chest until I could hardly breathe. At noon, I heard tires crunching on the gravel. Daniel's car pulled into the driveway. He stepped out in his pressed shirt and tied the air of a man preparing for his future, but not once looking at me as though I mattered. Sophia emerged behind him, sunglasses covering her eyes, the arrogance radiating off her like perfume. "Mom," Daniel said sharply, not even bothering with a greeting. "What's this about? You're upsetting the vendors." I stood from the porch holding the deed to the farm in my hands. "Upsetting them, Daniel? They're calling me because you planned your wedding on my property without my permission. You never even asked me." He scoffed, dismissive. "It's not a big deal. We're paying for everything. You don't have to worry about a thing." Sophia stepped closer, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "All you need to do is cook something simple for the family who stays after the party." "That's not too much to ask, is it?" The word slammed into me harder than any slap. Cook, clean, prepare. Once again reduced to a servant in the house I had bled for. I looked Daniel in the eyes. 40 years of my life bought this land. 40 years of scrubbing, saving, and enduring humiliation. And you think you can just take it as yours? His smile faltered for a split second, but then he shrugged. "Mom, stop exaggerating. It's one day. Our special day. Our special day," I repeated, my voice low and shaking. "On my land." Without my voice, I turned away from them, my heart pounding, and whispered to myself, "No more." Daniel followed me onto the porch, his steps heavy with impatience. "Mom, don't make this into a fight. Everyone expects us here on Saturday. 200 guests. Do you really want to humiliate us like that?" The word humiliation struck a nerve. For years, I had swallowed humiliation like bitter medicine when they barged in with their friends, when they left bottles in my flower beds, when they laughed about me being just old-fashioned. I had endured it quietly. But this was different. I turned on him, my voice sharp. "You humiliated me the moment you sent out invitations with my address, without asking. You humiliated me the moment you treated my home like a banquet hall, and me like the maid." Sophia's sunglasses slipped down her nose, revealing her glare. "Why are you being so dramatic? You should be grateful. Everyone will see your beautiful farm. It's like free advertising." "Advertising," I laughed bitterly. "This land is not a billboard. It's my sanctuary, and I will not let you trample it." For a heartbeat, silence hung between us. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, but Sophia pressed on. "If you don't cooperate, people will think you've gone senile. Do you want the whole town to say you've lost your mind?" The insult stung, but it also hardened my resolve. They thought fear would silence me. They thought shame would cage me. Not anymore. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "You think I'm powerless. But this farm has an owner, and you're looking at her." Daniel's face reddened, his jaw tightening. "Mom, don't do this. You'll regret it." But for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the one at risk of regret. I felt the ground under my feet, the wind through the mango trees, the steady heartbeat of a woman who had been pushed too far. I walked back to the rocking chair and sat down, the deed still in my lap. "Leave," I said simply. "I have things to prepare." Sophia scoffed. "Prepare?" For what I met her eyes with a calmness that unsettled her. "For showing you both that I am not your servant. I am your mother, and this is my home." Daniel's voice rose desperate now. "Mom, listen to yourself. This is crazy. We've already sent the invitations, people have RSVP'd. You can't just ruin everything." "Ruin everything," I whispered, rising slowly from my chair. "No, Daniel. You ruined everything the moment you forgot I existed." He flinched as though the words themselves were a slap. Sophia clutched his arm, her voice sharp as broken glass. "If you do this, you'll embarrass the family forever. Everyone will remember you as the bitter old woman who destroyed her son's wedding." I let her words hang in the air, then stepped closer so they both had to look into my eyes. Better to be remembered as the woman who defended her dignity than the one who let her own children walk over her. For the first time, Daniel's anger faltered. I saw a flicker of uncertainty, maybe even fear. Sophia, however, sneered. "If you go through with this, you'll never see your grandchildren again." The threat sliced deep, but instead of weakening me, it ignited a flame. "You think you can use them as weapons against me? No. The only thing you've ever used is my silence. And that ends today." I turned, opened the door, and stepped back into the kitchen. The air smelled of coffee gone cold. The walls felt steadier around me than their voices did outside. As I closed the door behind me, their shouting muffled to a dull roar. I set the deed on the table, pressing my palm over my name as if sealing a vow. My heart was racing, but my spirit was calm. I picked up the phone again, not to call Daniel back, not to beg, but to finalize my plan. I would rent my farm to strangers in suits if that's what it took. Executives would dine in the garden, where Sophia dreamed of her altar. Business contracts would be signed where vows were supposed to be spoken, and when the guests arrived on Saturday, 200 faces would see the truth. Not that I was mad, not that I was weak, but that I was the rightful owner of this home, and no one, not even my son, could take that from me. This wasn't the end of humiliation. It was only the beginning of their lesson. Early the next morning, the frost was still clinging to the grass when Stephen returned papers tucked neatly in his briefcase. He laid them across my kitchen table as if he were dealing a hand of cards, and in a way he was cards of power finally mine to play. "This is a standard lease contract," he explained. "Legally binding. Once you sign, the farm is booked for the date in question. Any other event, including a wedding, cannot proceed without your consent." I stared at the bold print, the lines of legal certainty that carried more weight than any words Daniel or Sophia had thrown at me. My name at the bottom would make it undeniable. "Are you sure?" I asked softly, though my heart already knew the answer. Stephen met my gaze. "Elizabeth, you've been silent too long. They assumed you would accept humiliation forever. This isn't revenge, it's justice. They need to understand you're not invisible. You're the owner." His voice was steady, like Ernest's had once been. I picked up the pen, my hand no longer trembling. With one stroke, I signed my name, Elizabeth Carter. The moment the ink dried, a weight lifted from my chest. I wasn't trapped anymore. For the first time in years, I had chosen myself. By afternoon, I stood at the gate of my farm as Henry Dawson, the director of Heritage Corporate Events, arrived with his assistant. They stepped out of a sleek black car, briefcases in hand, eyes already calculating the value of every inch of my property. "Mrs. Carter," Henry said, warmly shaking my hand. "This place is remarkable. Exactly the kind of exclusive venue our clients are desperate for." I guided them across the garden, the roses Ernest had planted brushing against my arm. The assistant scribbled notes about the parking space, the porch, the sweeping field under the old oak tree. "It's available this Saturday," I said calmly, "but I require punctuality and absolute privacy." Henry's face lit up. "Perfect. We'll pay in advance. No delays, no interference. Our executives expect only the best." As we shook hands, I felt something stirring in me, not fear, not anger, but power. The very ground beneath me seemed to whisper, "This is yours." By Friday, the transformation had already begun. Trucks rolled up the dirt road, their tires kicking dust into the crisp air. Men in black uniforms unloaded tables, chairs, floral arrangements, and a massive projection screen. The clatter of equipment echoed across my land, blending with the rustle of the trees. From my porch, I watched it all unfold. Where Sophia had envisioned an altar of white lilies, a corporate stage rose instead, sleek, metallic, commanding. Where she dreamed of guests, sipping champagne, round tables draped in ivory cloth were set, each with polished cutlery gleaming like silver swords. I couldn't help but smile. For once my farm wasn't a playground for entitled children, it was a stage for professionals who treated it with respect. Henry approached, clipboard in hand, his tone brisk but courteous. "Mrs. Carter, everything is ahead of schedule. The executives will arrive tomorrow at 2 sharp. We've doubled security at the entrance, just as you requested." I nodded. Privacy is non-negotiable. "Of course," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Your farm is exactly what our clients want, secluded, dignified, and untouchable." The word untouchable sank into me like a promise. After years of being treated as disposable, I was finally untouchable. As the men hammered stakes into the soil, my phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Mom, we're coming tomorrow morning to start setting up. Don't cause trouble." I stared at the words until they blurred. Trouble. For 40 years I had been the one cleaning their trouble. Picking up bottles, mending fences, keeping the world from seeing the chaos they left behind. "No more." I typed back a single reply. "This farm is already booked." The 3 dots blinked for a long while before vanishing. No answer. Silence. I leaned against the porch post, watching the banners unfurl, deep navy fabric embroidered with the logo of an international firm. Every movement of the workers, every crate carried into place was another stroke of defiance written across the canvas of my land. Tomorrow, when the guests arrived with their wedding invitations in hand, they would see the truth. And so would Daniel and Sophia. For the first time, I almost felt excited. That evening, as the sun slid behind the hills, I walked through the garden alone. The scent of jasmine lingered in the cool air, mingling with the faint hum of generators the event team had left behind. For once, my farm didn't feel invaded. It felt claimed. Mine. Neighbors began to call. First Irene, her voice hushed but quivering with curiosity. "Elizabeth, is it true you canceled Daniel's wedding?" I let out a small laugh. "I didn't cancel anything, Irene. I just rented my farm for a corporate event. The invitations were never mine to send." Her gasp crackled through the line. "My goodness, the whole town is whispering. Some say you've lost your mind. Others say you've finally shown your children who's in charge." I smiled into the twilight. Let them whisper. Tomorrow they'll see the truth for themselves. After hanging up, I sat back on my porch with a notebook and pen. If Daniel and Sophia thought I would be silenced, they were wrong. I began to sketch the words I wanted to speak when the time came, not to them alone, but to everyone. A toast, a declaration, a line drawn in public. As the night deepened, I lit the old lantern Ernest had bought decades ago at the fair. Its glow painted the porch in amber, and for a moment I felt his presence beside me. "Stand tall, Liz," I could almost hear him whisper. "Don't let them take what you built." The stars blinked awake overhead, each one like a witness preparing for tomorrow's drama. I clutched the deed in one hand, my pen in the other, and whispered to the night air, "This isn't just about a wedding. It's about respect. And tomorrow, in front of everyone, they'll learn that respect is not optional." A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere, a neighbor's radio hummed with chatter about the coming event. The whole town was already waiting. I closed my notebook, feeling a calm I hadn't known in years. Tomorrow would be chaos, yes, but it would be my chaos, crafted, deliberate, unstoppable. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of humiliation. I was ready to wield it. Saturday morning dawned sharp and bright, the kind of day meant for celebrations. Yet instead of joy, there was tension in the air, so thick it seemed to press against my skin. I dressed carefully in a burgundy dress, Ernest had once said, brought out the fire in my eyes. Today, I wanted that fire to be seen. By 9 o'clock, the gravel crunched again under tires. Daniel's car pulled up, dust curling behind it like smoke from a coming fire. He got out in a rush, his tie loosened his face, already flushed with anger. Sophia followed, her white silk robe trailing in the dirt, a veil of arrogance in every step. Mom, Daniel barked, storming toward the porch. "What the hell is going on? The florist says he can't set up. The DJ says the property is blocked and guests are calling me in confusion." I stayed seated in my rocking chair, the deed resting calmly on my lap. "Good morning, Daniel," I said evenly, my voice like still water hiding the current beneath. "Yes, that's correct. The property is already rented for today." Sophia gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Rented? What do you mean rented? This is our wedding day." "Our wedding day," I repeated softly, standing at last. "But not your land, not your right, not your decision. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. You can't do this. 200 people are expecting to be here. The church can't change locations. The caterer's on the way. Mom, don't humiliate us like this. Humiliation, I whispered, my eyes locking onto his. Daniel, humiliation is what you gave me when you sent out 200 invitations with my address without asking. Humiliation is treating your mother like the maid of her own house. Today that humiliation is yours to carry. Sophia's voice cracked, hysteria breaking through the polish. This is insane. You'll ruin everything. Cancel those people. Pay them back whatever they want. Just get them out. I shook my head slowly, almost pitying her. I signed a contract. They paid me in advance. And unlike you, I keep my word. Daniel's face turned scarlet. You'll regret this, Mom. You'll regret it when no one ever forgives you. I straightened my back, my voice firm. No, Daniel. I'll regret it if I keep letting you forget me. Sophia's lips trembled, but her eyes burned with fury. She stepped closer until her perfume, sweet, heavy, suffocating, filled the air between us. You can't do this, she hissed. You'll ruin our lives. Do you understand? We've planned this for months. My family flew in from 3 different countries. People bought gifts, hotels are full, the entire town is watching. If you don't give in, you'll be the villain everyone whispers about. I let her words hang sharp as thorns before answering with calm finality. Then let them whisper. Better to be whispered about than walked over. Her composure cracked. She dropped the act of icy arrogance and replaced it with trembling desperation. Tears welled in her eyes, smearing the edges of her makeup. Please, Elizabeth, you're his mother. A mother is supposed to sacrifice for her son's happiness. Don't you want to see him married, smiling, building a family? For a moment her plea reached for the part of me that still longed for peace, for harmony. But then she pressed harder, too hard. If you don't let us marry here today, she whispered, her voice sharp as a blade, you'll never see your grandchildren again. The words sliced through me. My breath caught and the world seemed to go quiet. For a heartbeat, the pain of that threat felt heavier than all the years of humiliation combined. But then something shifted. I straightened, meeting her tearful eyes without flinching. You think you can dangle them over me like weapons. But you've already taken enough. You will not take my dignity too. Daniel stepped forward, his voice cracking with panic. Mom, please, don't do this. Cancel the corporate event. I'll pay you back. I'll give you whatever you want. Just please don't humiliate us. I looked at my son, the boy I had carried, the man who now stood trembling before me, and felt the ache of betrayal deep in my bones. You want me to rescue you, I said softly. But whoever rescued me when I worked until my hands bled? Whoever rescued me when you left me to clean your messes? Respect is not a gift, Daniel. It's a duty. And you forgot it long ago. Sophia's tears spilled freely, staining her silk robe. Daniel's jaw clenched, but I could see the cracks forming. For the first time they realized I wasn't backing down. And I whispered the truth aloud. Today you learn who I really am. Daniel's voice thundered across the porch, shaking the morning air. Enough, Mom. You can't treat us like this. We're your family. Don't you understand? Without you, this wedding collapses. Family, I repeated, slowly tasting the word as if it were poison. Family is respect. Family is consideration. Tell me, Daniel, where was that family when you sent out 200 invitations with my farm's address and never spoke to me? His jaw locked, but he had no answer. Sophia collapsed onto the porch, her silk robe catching the dust, her tears smearing into streaks of black mascara. People are arriving in just a few hours. Please, please don't do this to us. I studied her, this woman who had ridiculed me in whispers, who had strutted through my kitchen as though she owned it, who now sat crumbling in the dirt of the porch she once disrespected. You wanted to use me as a backdrop for your glory, I said, my voice firm but not cruel. But I am not scenery. I am the owner. Sophia sobbed harder, rocking on her heels. Daniel knelt beside her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. He looked up at me, his eyes finally stripped of arrogance. For the first time there was fear. Then what do you want? He demanded hoarsely. Money, an apology. Tell me what will make you stop this madness. I met his gaze with steel. I don't want your money. I don't want empty words. I want the truth laid bare, the truth that I matter, the truth that this land has one owner, and it's not you. For a moment, silence blanketed us. The only sound was the rustle of the mango leaves and Sophia's uneven breaths. Daniel stood, brushing dust from his knees, and spat bitterly. This isn't over. You'll regret this, Mom. Everyone will hate you for what you've done. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. Better to be hated for standing tall than loved for kneeling in silence. He turned away, helping Sophia back into the car. Gravel spit under their tires as they sped off, dust swirling into the air. I remained on the porch, the deed clutched in my hand, my heart hammering steady. Their rage no longer shook me. Their threats no longer bound me. Because I knew the next time I saw them, they would not arrive alone. They would arrive with 200 witnesses. And then, the true lesson would begin. By noon, the first cars began rolling down the dusty road. One after another, polished sedans and rented vans pulled up, their passengers dressed in silk lace and pressed suits. The sound of doors slamming, heels crunching against gravel, and voices filled the air. My quiet farm, once a sanctuary, now bristled with expectation. From my porch I watched them arrive, 200 guests carrying gifts wrapped in gold paper, bouquets of lilies, boxes of fine wine. They stepped out, smiling, laughing, unaware of the storm they were walking into. "Excuse me, ma'am," one man asked politely, holding his wife's arm. "Do you know where the wedding of Daniel and Sophia is being held?" We were told this address. I rested my hands on the porch rail and answered softly, "You were told correctly. But today this property is not available for their wedding." Confusion flickered across his face. His wife frowned. "What do you mean the invitations all say here?" I offered a kind smile, though my words cut like ice. "I am the owner of this farm, and it is already booked for a different event." Whispers rippled through the crowd. More cars pulled up, more voices rose. Some guests pulled out their invitations, staring at the printed address as if their eyes had deceived them. Others began to murmur, their glances darting from me to the elaborate setup behind the gates, corporate banners fluttering, tables set with precision, a stage gleaming in the midday Sunday. The whispers grew louder. "Is this a mistake? How could they not check with her? This is unbelievable." Humiliation spread like fire, and though it wasn't aimed at me this time, I could feel the weight of it pressing down on the name Carter. Then I saw Daniel's car again. He pulled up, fast tires, spitting gravel, and leapt out, his tuxedo coat flaring behind him. Sophia stumbled after him in her wedding gown, the hem already stained with dust. Gasps broke out among the guests at the sight of her, the bride in white trembling with fury. They looked from her to me, waiting for answers, and I stayed calm, my voice steady. Now everyone will see what respect, or the lack of it, truly looks like. The crowd swelled near the entrance, their voices overlapping in a chorus of shock and gossip. Guests in pastel dresses fanned themselves nervously, men tugged at their collars, and children clutched at their parents' hands wide-eyed. "Why are there businessmen where the altar should be?" someone muttered. "Didn't they ask permission?" another whispered, loud enough for 10 others to hear. I could feel the shift in the air, the humiliation no longer confined to whispered phone calls or private arguments. It was now spilling into the open, under the gaze of 200 witnesses. Sophia's face crumpled as she spun to Daniel, her voice breaking. "Do something. They're staring at us like fools." Daniel turned to me, his eyes wild, desperate. "Mom, please, this has gone too far. Stop this before the whole town knows." I met his gaze steadily. The town already knows. They've always known. Today they finally see it for themselves. A hush fell as a black car pulled up. Father Thomas stepped out slowly, his clerical collar bright against the sunlight. The murmurs softened into silence as the priest made his way through the crowd. His calm presence seemed to part the chaos, his hand raised in quiet authority. He approached Daniel first, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "My son, what is happening here?" Daniel's voice cracked, shame spilling through. "Father, my mom rented the farm to someone else. She didn't let us use it." Father Thomas turned his wise eyes to me. "Is that true, Mrs. Carter?" I lifted the deed from my lap and held it where everyone could see. "It is true. Because this farm belongs to me, and no one, not even my own children, has the right to use it without asking." The silence was heavy, broken only by the rustle of dresses and the click of cameras as some guests pulled out their phones recording. Father Thomas nodded slowly, his voice deep and even. "I see. Then perhaps today is not about a wedding alone. Perhaps today is about respect." Gasps rippled again, some guests nodding in agreement, others glancing at the bride and groom with open disapproval. And I felt it, the tide turning. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one shrinking under humiliation. I was the one standing above it. Sophia's breath came in ragged sobs. She clutched at her gown, the lace dragging in the dirt, and collapsed to her knees right there at the gate. A ripple of shock tore through the guests' gasps, hands covering mouths, heads turning. The bride on her knees before the mother-in-law she had mocked for years. "Please," she cried, her voice raw, echoing across the farm. Elizabeth, don't ruin this. Don't take this day from us. I'll do anything. I'll pay you. I'll beg you. Just let the wedding happen." Her tears streaked black lines down her cheeks, the image stark and unforgettable. A once proud bride now shattered before her own guests. Daniel tried to pull her up, but she shoved his hand away, sobbing harder. "This is my wedding day. My family is watching. Do something." The crowd stirred uncomfortably. Some whispered in sympathy, but others shook their heads, disgust etched across their faces. How could they not ask her? It's her land. Shameful. I stepped forward slowly, the deed still in my hand. My voice carried clear and firm. "You say I'm ruining this day, but you ruined it the moment you used me as if I were nothing. For 5 years I cleaned up your parties. I cooked for your friends. I was treated like a servant in my own home. And now the whole world sees the truth." Sophia's shoulders shook. She bowed her head so low her veil touched the dirt. The sight was almost pitiful, but it was also justice. Father Thomas raised his hand, silencing the murmurs. "Enough. Today this family faces its truth. A mother should not be disrespected. A son should not forget the woman who gave him life. And a wife," his eyes lingered on Sophia, "should never treat her husband's mother as a burden." The crowd erupted, voices rising in agreement. Some clapped softly, others nodded with solemn approval. Daniel's face was pale, his pride stripped bare. He looked at me as though seeing me for the first time, not as a housekeeper, not as someone to be ignored, but as the rightful matriarch. And I whispered almost to myself, but loud enough for the crowd to hear, "Respect is not optional." The words lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable. The air was charged, every pair of eyes fixed on us. Sophia still knelt in the dust, trembling with sobs, while Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. For a moment I thought he might finally break into shame. Instead, his pride surged back like a wounded animal. "This is outrageous," he roared, turning to the crowd. "She's lost her mind. She has no right to destroy her own son's wedding." Murmurs broke out, uncertain, conflicted. But before anyone could respond, Daniel jabbed his finger at me. "I'll call a lawyer. I'll take this to court. You think this farm is safe? I'll prove you're unfit, that you don't know what you're doing. We'll take everything back legally." The venom in his voice was sharp enough to silence the guests. Some gasped, others shook their heads. Even Father Thomas's face tightened in disappointment. I lifted the deed in my hand, steady as a sword. "You'll call a lawyer," I said softly. "Then bring them. Because the law is already on my side." The crowd erupted again, louder this time, half in shock, half in approval. Sophia staggered to her feet, her veil slipping, her gown smeared with dust. She clutched Daniel's arm, her voice breaking into a scream. "She's insane, don't you see? She planned this to humiliate us. She wants revenge." I stepped closer, my eyes locked on hers. "No, Sophia, I want respect. Revenge would have been locking the gates and letting you face your guests outside in the cold. Instead, I gave you a chance to face the truth here before everyone." But Sophia only shrieked louder, her words spiraling into rage. "Don't listen to her. She's bitter, jealous, senile. This isn't justice, it's cruelty." For a heartbeat, her accusations seemed to hang in the air. The guests leaned forward, waiting, watching. And then from the back of the crowd, a neighbor's voice rang out, clear and cutting. "She's not senile. She's right." Heads turned. It was Irene, my neighbor of 30 years. She stepped forward, her face flushed with courage. "For years we've seen how you treated her. Parties without permission, trash left behind, laughter at her expense. We all saw it. And now we all see her standing tall." The whispers shifted again, no longer against me, but against them. And for the first time, Daniel's bravado faltered. Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came. The silence was heavier than any shout. Irene's voice had cut through his bravado like a blade, and now the crowd shifted uneasily, murmurs spreading like wildfire. Another voice rose, this time from Mr. Collins, the farmer who lived half a mile down the road. He stepped forward, his weathered hat in his hand. "I've seen it too. Late night's noise trash left at her gate, and she never said a word. She carried it all with dignity." A wave of nods rippled through the guests. Sophia spun her eyes wide, desperate. "You don't understand. We're family. Family doesn't need to ask permission. We thought family doesn't use each other," Mrs. Turner, the grocer's wife, interrupted coldly. "We've heard how you speak to her. Old woman, burden, even calling her senile just now. That's not family, that's cruelty." Gasps broke out. Sophia's cheeks flushed scarlet, her hands trembling as she clutched her veil. Daniel tried to raise his voice above the tide. "She's manipulating you." She rented this farm just to ruin us. She's driven by spite, can't you see? But his words landed weak, brittle, already drowned by the swelling voices of the community. We've known Elizabeth all our lives. She worked harder than anyone here. She deserves respect, not humiliation. Each declaration was another stone laid against them, a wall they couldn't climb. Sophia clutched Daniel's arm, her voice cracking into hysteria. If you all side with her, we'll sue every one of you for defamation. You think this is over? We'll take her farm, The threat fell flat, smothered by the scornful silence of the crowd. Even Father Thomas stepped closer, his hand raised as if to shield me. Threats, he said gravely, his voice carrying over the murmurs. When love is supposed to be spoken, you use threats. When humility is needed, you wield arrogance. This is not how a marriage should begin. The crowd murmured agreement louder this time, some even clapping softly. Sophia's lips quivered. Daniel's face tightened, but his eyes betrayed it fear. Fear not of me, but of the truth now laid bare, witnessed by 200 souls. And as I looked at them trembling in the spotlight of their own shame, I whispered to myself, humiliation no longer belongs to me. It belongs to them. Daniel's voice cracked like dry wood under pressure. You'll regret this, all of you, he shouted, his face blotched red. Do you know who we are? We'll take her to court, we'll prove she's unfit, we'll make sure she loses everything. You think this farm is safe, it won't be hers for long. The crowd erupted not in support but in outrage. You threaten your own mother, a man barked from the back. Unfit, she worked her hands raw to buy this land, another cried. Shame on you, Daniel. The murmurs grew into a chorus of condemnation. People shook their heads, women pulled their children closer, men folded their arms in disgust. It was no longer a wedding crowd, it was a jury, and the verdict was turning against them. Sophia clung to Daniel's arm, her voice shrill, desperate. Don't listen to them, she's jealous, she's bitter, she wants to destroy us because she can't stand to see us happy. But the crowd had heard enough. Irene stepped forward again, her voice ringing clear. She doesn't want to destroy you. She wants to be respected, something you've denied her for years. Applause rippled through the guests, hesitant at first, then swelling until claps and nods filled the air. The sound struck Daniel and Sophia like thunder, their faces paling, their confidence crumbling. Father Thomas raised his voice above the commotion. Enough. This day was meant to celebrate love, but what have we seen instead? Threats, arrogance, humiliation. And not from the mother, but from the children who should honor her. Silence followed, heavy and unbroken. Daniel looked at Sophia, then back at me. His chest rose and fell with fury, but the fire in his eyes was dimming. They were cornered, stripped bare before their guests. Sophia's final words trembled out in a whisper brittle as glass. We'll never forget this. I stepped forward, the deed firm in my hand, and answered so all could hear good. Let it be remembered. Because respect is not optional, and today everyone here has learned it. The guests clapped again, louder, stronger, until the farm itself seemed to tremble with the sound. Daniel and Sophia stood frozen, swallowed in the humiliation they had sown. And for the first time in years I breathed freely, no longer the one silenced, but the one heard. The farm had fallen silent, but the silence was heavy, an audience waiting for the next act. 200 guests stood in stunned clusters, their eyes flicking between me on the porch and Daniel and Sophia wilting under the weight of shame. Daniel's lips parted, but no words came. His hands trembled at his sides, his tuxedo now more like a costume than a symbol of pride. Sophia dabbed at her ruined makeup with shaking fingers, her veil crumpled like discarded paper. I stepped forward, the wooden boards of the porch creaking beneath my heels. My voice carried steady and sure. You came here expecting my silence. You thought my home was yours to command. But today, in front of everyone, you will hear the truth. If you still want this wedding on my farm, you will follow my rules. Gasps spread through the crowd. Some guests leaned closer, others held their breath. Daniel's head snapped up, his voice sharp. Rules, you can't dictate terms. This is supposed to be our day. Our day, I repeated the word, cold. You planned a wedding on land that wasn't yours. You printed invitations with an address that wasn't yours. And you want to talk about your day? No, Daniel. If you want to marry here, then it will happen on my terms. Sophia staggered forward, clutching the fabric of her gown. What do you want from us? She whispered, her voice trembling. The guests leaned in. My words came slow, deliberate, each one like a hammer striking the foundation of their arrogance. First monthly rent. From this day forward, if you use my property for anything, you will pay me $1,000 each month plus expenses. Second, advance notice, at least 30 days before any event and only if I approve. Third, public recognition. Today, before this crowd, you will acknowledge me as the owner and hostess of this land." Daniel's jaw clenched. His eyes darted to the crowd, to Sophia, then back to me. And if we refuse, I held his gaze until the silence grew unbearable. Then I answered with calm finality, "Then your wedding ends here, and you will walk away with nothing but humiliation." Daniel's breath came out harsh, ragged. His fists opened and closed as though he were trying to hold on to the last scraps of control. "Mom, this is insane. You're humiliating us in front of everyone. Just cancel this event and we'll work something out privately." A bitter laugh slipped from my throat. Privately. That's what you always wanted. My humiliation kept hidden behind closed doors where no one could see. Not today. Today the truth is public. The crowd shifted, eyes locked on me, waiting. I raised my voice clear enough to carry to the farthest guest. "Fourth condition, you will apologize. Not in whispers, not in private. Here, now. Before every guest you invited without my permission. You will explain what you did and why this moment is happening." Sophia's knees buckled. She grabbed Daniel's arm, horror flooding her face. "No, we can't. We can't tell them. They'll think we're ungrateful. They'll never respect us again." "Respect," I shot back the word like a whip. "Respect is earned, not borrowed, and you've spent years taking mine without asking." Some guests nodded, murmurs of agreement rising like a tide. The humiliation had shifted fully, no longer mine to carry. Daniel's voice cracked. "You're asking us to destroy ourselves in front of everyone." "No," I said firmly. "I'm asking you to tell the truth. To accept that the woman you call Mom is not invisible, that she owns this land, that she has a voice, and that voice will be heard." Sophia's tears flowed again, streaking through the powder on her cheeks. "Elizabeth, please. I'll pay you double the rent, triple anything. Just don't make us do this." I looked at her, this woman who had strutted through my kitchen, dismissing me as though I were a relic, and I felt nothing but resolve. Money doesn't buy respect. Only actions do. The crowd hushed. Father Thomas stepped forward, his voice low but carrying. "She has given you a choice, my children. Pride or humility. Decide wisely, for marriage built on pride alone will crumble." Daniel swallowed hard, his eyes flicking desperately across the faces of 200 witnesses. Each second dragged like an eternity, every eye waiting for his answer. Daniel's lips quivered. For years he had worn arrogance like a shield, but now it cracked before the weight of 200 eyes. He looked at Sophia, her face streaked with tears, her veil in tatters, and then at me. His shoulders slumped as though the fight had drained from his body. We... His voice broke. He cleared his throat, but the words refused to come easily. "We accept your conditions." Gasps spread through the crowd. Sophia shook her head violently, clutching at his arm. "No, Daniel, don't you dare. We'll never live this down." But his eyes no longer burned with defiance. Instead, there was the hollow look of a man cornered. "What choice do we have, Sophia? We're already ruined." I stepped closer, my heels clicking against the porch floorboards, my gaze steady on both of them. "Say it properly. Not to me. To them." I gestured to the crowd, neighbors, friends, relatives, strangers, every soul who had come expecting to witness a wedding and now stood witness to something far greater truth. Daniel's face flushed red. His hands trembled as he turned to the sea of eyes. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again, his pride shattering with every syllable. We disrespected her. We planned this wedding on her land without asking. We sent invitations with her address without permission." His voice cracked, but he pressed on. "We treated her as though she didn't matter. And now, we stand humiliated because of it." The silence that followed was crushing. Then like thunder it broke, gasps, whispers, even scattered applause from those who understood the courage it took to admit such a truth. Sophia sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Father Thomas placed a hand on her trembling shoulder. "Child humility is not weakness. It is the first step to respect." I stood tall, my heart steady, the deed pressed to my chest. For years I had begged silently for acknowledgement. Now I had it public, undeniable, carved into memory. "Good," I said, my voice carrying across the stunned crowd. "You have confessed. Now your wedding may proceed. But remember this moment, because respect once lost can only be rebuilt with truth." The crowd erupted, not with cheers for the bride and groom, but with applause for the mother who had finally claimed her place. And in that sound I knew the balance of power had shifted forever. The The sun was sliding lower in the sky when the wedding guests were finally ushered toward the garden. The corporate team had finished dismantling their equipment, leaving behind tables, chairs, and decorations that now stood as borrowed symbols for a ceremony that was anything but ordinary. The altar was set under the wide branches of the old mango tree Ernest and I had planted together decades ago. Its roots were deep, its branches strong, a living testament to endurance. I had chosen that tree deliberately. If vows were to be spoken here, they would be spoken beneath something that outlasted betrayal. Guests shuffled into their seats, whispering, their gazes darting between me and the couple who stood stiffly at the entrance. Daniel adjusted his tuxedo jacket, his face pale, his pride fractured. Sophia clutched her bouquet with trembling hands, her gown still marked with dust. She looked every bit the bride, but her eyes betrayed her shame. Father Thomas stood near the altar, his hands folded, his voice calm but commanding as he invited everyone to take their places. Yet the hush that fell wasn't one of romance, it was the silence of a courtroom before the verdict. As I walked toward the front, guests turned their heads. No longer was I invisible, the servant in the shadows. Today I was seen. I wore my burgundy dress like armor, my chin held high, every step deliberate. Sophia's eyes flickered toward me, a mixture of resentment and fear. Daniel swallowed hard, his Adam's apple rising like he had a stone lodged in his throat. Father Thomas cleared his throat, his voice solemn. We gather here to witness vows of love, but first we must acknowledge the truth. This ceremony happens only because respect has been demanded and given. A ripple moved through the crowd. Some nodded, some shifted uncomfortably. I stood nearby, my presence impossible to ignore. For years I had dreamed of being respected at my own table in my own home, and now beneath the branches of the mango tree with 200 witnesses holding their breath, that dream had finally begun to take root. This was not their perfect wedding. It was something else entirely, an open lesson carved in memory. The music began softly, a violin straining to sound cheerful, though even its notes carried unease. Guests shifted in their seats, whispering as Daniel led Sophia down the makeshift aisle. Her white dress shimmered in the golden light of late afternoon, but the stains of dust and humiliation clung to her like shadows no veil could hide. I sat in the front row, not as a forgotten mother tucked away in the back, but as the undeniable matriarch. My presence was as visible as the burgundy fabric of my dress, the deed folded neatly in my lap. For once, every eye that glanced at me did not see a servant, they saw the owner. As Sophia passed, I heard murmurs behind me. She looks beautiful, but after all that, I can't believe they did this to her. Imagine sending invitations without asking. The whispers coiled around Sophia like chains. Her smile quivered, forced, as though she were walking through judgment instead of celebration. Daniel tried to keep his chin high, but I saw the tension in his jaw, the flicker in his eyes when another guest turned to stare. Father Thomas began the service, his voice solemn. Marriage is a union not only of love, but of respect, and without respect, love withers. The words lingered, deliberate, echoing like an indictment. Some guests nodded. Others glanced between the priest and the couple with sharp awareness. I folded my hands, steady, my gaze fixed. I wasn't there to disrupt. I didn't need to. The disruption was already woven into the air. Every whisper, every sideways glance, every note of the violin was a reminder that this wedding was not born of joy but of consequence. For a fleeting second, Sophia's eyes darted to mine. I didn't flinch. I didn't soften. I simply held her gaze until she looked away, her lips trembling. The vows began shaky but recited. For better or for worse, Daniel muttered, though the irony wasn't lost on the crowd. Sophia's voice cracked as she repeated hers, tears threatening to fall, though not of joy. And as the mango leaves rustled overhead, I leaned back, my heart steady. Let them say their vows. Let them play the part. Everyone here knew the truth, that this union began under the shadow of respect demanded, not freely given. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Father Thomas lifted his hands, his voice steady as he pronounced the final blessing. By the vows spoken here in the sight of God and this community, you are now husband and wife. The words should have sparked applause, laughter, joy. Instead, a hesitant murmur ran through the crowd, uneven claps echoing like stones tossed into still water. Some guests smiled politely, but many kept their eyes down, their expressions tight, weighed by everything they had witnessed. Daniel leaned forward and kissed Sophia, but even that kiss carried the stiffness of obligation rather than passion. Her veil fluttered in the late breeze, and I wondered if she felt the same truth the rest of us did. This day had been won, but not by them. I rose from my chair. Immediately a hush fell over the crowd. 200 pairs of eyes turned to me. I didn't need to ask for silence, it came on its own, heavy and expectant. I stood beneath the mango tree, its branches stretching above me like guardians, and felt the weight of the moment settle onto my shoulders. For decades I had been silent, erased in the background. Today, that silence ended. Daniel tried to speak, but Father Thomas lifted a hand to still him. His gaze flicked to me, a faint nod of acknowledgement. This was my moment. The caterers began moving trays of champagne flutes through the crowd, the golden bubbles trembling inside the glass. One was pressed gently into my hand. I raised it high, my burgundy sleeve catching the last light of the Sunday. "My friends," I began, my voice clear and strong, "before we toast to love, we must first toast to truth." Gasps stirred across the garden. I could see Sophia stiffen her knuckles white around her bouquet. Daniel froze, his face pale, but he knew, just as every guest knew, that I was about to speak the words they had all been waiting for. The silence was absolute now, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the quiet clink of glasses. Tomorrow, they would call it a wedding. But tonight it would be remembered as something else entirely. The moment of truth had come. I stood with the glass in my hand, the last light of sunset gilding the rim. 200 faces stared at me, waiting, uncertain whether this would be the gentle toast of a mother or the cutting words of a woman who had been silenced too long. I let the pause stretch. Silence has power, and I wanted them to feel it. "My friends," I began, my voice steady, carrying over the crowd, "I thank you for coming to celebrate my son's marriage. But before you raise your glasses, you deserve to know the truth of why this day unfolded the way it has." Gasps whispered through the rows. Sophia's lips parted in horror, her hand tightening on Daniel's arm. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between me and the crowd. I raised the deed, holding it high so all could see the bold ink of my name. "This farm is mine. I worked 40 years of my life to buy it. I scrubbed floors that weren't mine, ironed shirts for men who didn't know my name, endured humiliation until my hands bled and my back ached. And when I finally bought this land, I swore it would be my sanctuary." The crowd was silent, leaning closer, every word like a bell tolling. "But my own son and his wife," I continued, my voice tightening, "sent out 200 wedding invitations with my farm's address, without asking, without even telling me. They planned this entire day as though I were invisible, as though my years of labor, my dignity, my name meant nothing." A murmur rippled heads, turning toward Daniel and Sophia. Some guests gasped, others shook their heads in disbelief. I steadied my glass, my hand firm. "I found out about this wedding the same way you did, by invitation. I discovered it from vendors calling my phone, asking me about arches of roses and menus for 200 guests. Imagine the humiliation of finding out your own child had given away your home without your consent." The whispers grew sharper, angrier. Sophia's face drained of color. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he could not speak. "And so," I said, my voice rising, "I made a choice. To remind them and to remind all of you that respect is not optional." The murmurs swelled, then quieted again as I lifted my hand for silence. 200 faces glimmered in the candlelight, their glasses half raised, their eyes fixed on me. "For 5 years," I said, my voice steady, "I was the silent hostess of every gathering my son and his wife threw here. I cooked their meals. I cleaned their messes. I picked bottles out of my flower beds and swept broken glass from my porch. And never once did they thank me, not truly. I was treated not as a mother but as a servant in the very house I built with my own blood and sweat." Gasps scattered through the crowd. I saw heads shaking, lips pressed thin with disapproval. A woman in the third row whispered harshly, "Shameful," and the words seemed to ripple outward like a wave. Sophia's bouquet slipped from her trembling hands, petals scattering across the ground. Her mascara-stained cheeks glistened in the lamplight. Daniel's eyes burned with humiliation, his lips pressed into a hard, thin line, but he did not interrupt. He couldn't, not with the weight of 200 witnesses pressing down on him. I drew a breath, letting the pain in my chest fuel the strength in my words. They assumed I would stay silent forever, that my love meant submission, that motherhood meant erasing myself so they could shine. But love without respect is not love, it is bondage. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some guests clapped softly, hesitant but supportive. Others nodded solemnly, their eyes never leaving my face. I lowered the deed slowly, placing my glass of champagne against my heart. When I discovered what they had done, I made a choice. I rented this farm to another event, a corporate gathering. Because if my voice was not enough to remind them that this land belongs to me, then perhaps humiliation would be. And so today you see it plainly that this farm has an owner, and that owner is me." The crowd erupted not with polite applause but with thunderous clapping, louder than the vows, louder than the kiss. Some rose to their feet, others shouted words of support. I stood tall, the sound washing over me like a tide. For the first time in decades, I was not invisible. I was undeniable. The applause rolled over me like thunder, but I lifted my hand again and the crowd quieted. Their eyes shone not just with curiosity but with something deeper: respect. I raised my glass higher, the champagne catching the glow of lanterns strung through the branches of the mango tree. My voice rang out clear and sharp. "Tonight we toast not only to a marriage but to a truth long ignored. Respect is not optional. Consideration is not a favor. They are the foundation on which family is built." Gasps echoed, but no one moved. Sophia clutched Daniel's arm, her shoulders trembling. Daniel's face had gone pale, his eyes glistening, though he tried to hide it. "For 40 years," I continued, "I dreamed of a place where I could live with dignity. This farm is that dream. And for 5 years I watched it be trampled, my love mistaken for weakness. No more. Today my son and his wife learn before you all that a mother's silence is not an endless well. One day it runs dry, and when it does, truth takes its place." The crowd leaned forward, holding on to every word. Even Father Thomas bowed his head, his lips moving as if in prayer. I turned toward the bride and grew my gaze steady. "Daniel, Sophia, this day will not be remembered as the day you were humiliated. It will be remembered as the day you finally learned that marriage, like family, must be rooted in respect. If you can honor that lesson, then perhaps love still has a chance to grow." A hush followed so deep I could hear the wind stir the mango leaves above us. Slowly I raised my glass. To truth, to respect, and to a future where no mother, no woman will ever be treated as invisible in her own home again. For a heartbeat there was silence. Then, like a dam breaking, the crowd rose to their feet. Glasses lifted, high voices shouted, applause thundered until the air itself seemed to shake. My hand trembled slightly as I took a sip, but my heart was steady. In that moment, I knew I had won not just a battle with my son and his wife, but the war for my own dignity. And nothing, not even 200 whispers, could ever take it from me again. The echoes of applause still lingered in the night air, a chorus that seemed to bless not just the wedding but my reclamation of dignity. When the sound softened and people returned to their seats, Father Thomas raised his hands and spoke with calm authority. "Let us continue now that truth has been spoken. This union may move forward, but let it grow from honesty, not deceit." The guests settled, though the atmosphere had changed. It was no longer a celebration built on illusion. It was a gathering bound by a lesson everyone had witnessed with their own eyes. Daniel helped Sophia to her feet, his hand trembling as it touched hers. For a fleeting second our eyes met. His face, pale, streaked with humiliation, carried something I hadn't seen in years. Not arrogance, not defiance. Something closer to humility. The music swelled once again, cautious but steady, as the couple stood beneath the mango tree. Father Thomas resumed the final blessings, his voice threading through the quiet night like a hymn. But it wasn't his words that held the crowd's attention. It was the silence surrounding Sophia and Daniel, the weight of what they had confessed, the undeniable truth hanging between them and 200 witnesses. When they finally turned to face each other, their vows came halting heavy. "I promise to honor," Daniel whispered, his voice rough, "to respect, to remember." His eyes flicked toward me before he looked back at his bride. Sophia's voice cracked as she echoed her part, her words trembling with tears. "For better or worse, with respect always." The vows were not sweet, not romantic. They were raw, broken, forced into being by truth. And perhaps that made them more real than any polished words they could have rehearsed. As the priest declared them husband and wife, applause rose again, but softer, this time tinged with solemnity. It was no longer the applause of celebration. It was the applause of a community that had witnessed justice done. I remained standing, my glass still in hand, my burgundy dress catching the lantern light. For once I did not feel like a shadow in the corner. I felt like a queen at her throne, watching as those who had once disrespected her learned to bow to truth. The reception began, but it no longer belonged to the bride and groom. Guests milled about under the lanterns, their laughter cautious, their conversations hushed. Everywhere I turned, I felt eyes drifting toward me, not with pity, not with dismissal, but with something far heavier: respect. As waiters circulated with trays of champagne and slices of cake, people approached one by one. "Mrs. Carter, an elderly woman said softly, pressing my hand between hers. You did what so many of us wish we could do. You spoke the truth. Another guest leaned in, her voice low but firm. I hope my children heard every word you said tonight. It was a lesson for all of us. Their words filled me with a warmth that no bouquet or wedding gift could rival. For once, my story wasn't whispered in corners, it was spoken openly, acknowledged, validated. Meanwhile, Daniel and Sophia drifted among their guests like ghosts. Daniel's smile was tight, his laughter hollow. Sophia's gown shimmered, but her eyes were swollen, her movements stiff under the stares that followed her. They had their wedding, yes, but not the triumph they had imagined. At one point, I caught Daniel standing alone by the edge of the garden, staring into the dark fields. His shoulders sagged, his glass untouched. He looked less like a groom and more like a boy caught in the act of mischief, forced to face consequences at last. Sophia, meanwhile, forced herself to circulate, clinging to shallow chatter, but I could see at every whisper she overheard. Every sideways glance was another dagger. Her humiliation was complete not by my hand alone, but by the truth everyone had seen. Neighbors came to me in clusters, shaking my hand, some even embracing me. You're brave, they said. You're an example. We'll never forget this night. I smiled, not out of pride, but out of relief. After so many years of swallowing my pain, of being silent for the sake of peace, tonight had given me back my voice. As the music played, I sat at the head table, not as a guest of pity, but as the hostess of my own land. And no one dared to forget it. The night wore on, lanterns swaying gently in the breeze, their glow softening the sharp edges of the day. The music continued, but even the melodies seemed subdued, like a backdrop to something greater than a wedding. As guests began to leave, many stopped once more to take my hand. Thank you for speaking, one man whispered. You gave voice to what so many mothers feel but never say. Another pressed a note into my palm, a simple line scribbled in hurried ink. Never stop reminding them who you are. When the last toast had been given and the final slice of cake taken, I remained beneath the mango tree, watching as chairs were folded and tables cleared. Daniel and Sophia slipped away quietly, not with fanfare but with the hollow silence of two people whose pride had been stripped bare. I sat down in my rocking chair, the same one where this all began, and let the cool night air wash over me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. Not just by my family, but by my community, by every witness who had carried my truth away with them tonight. And yet, even as peace settled over me, I knew this was not the end. The humiliation I had endured, the lessons I had spoken aloud, they could not simply stay here locked within the walls of my farm. They had to reach further to others who were still silenced in their own homes, waiting for someone to tell them they mattered. I thought of Ernest, of his steady voice urging me to stand tall. I thought of the women I had met since his passing, each carrying stories of betrayal, of sacrifice dismissed, of dignity denied. That night, as the lanterns flickered low, I whispered into the stillness, the Carter Foundation will not just be about my pain, it will be about giving every forgotten voice a place to be heard. The stars blinked awake above me, countless and eternal, as though they too bore witness. And in their light I felt the beginning of something greater than revenge, something rooted in justice and healing. This was no longer just my fight, it was the start of a mission, and tomorrow the world would know it. The farm was quiet again. The lanterns had burned low, their soft glow barely brushing the fields Ernest and I had once walked together. The chairs were gone, the laughter faded, the echoes of applause now just a memory carried on the night breeze. I sat alone on the porch, my burgundy dress folded neatly at my side, the deed resting on my lap. The silence felt different tonight, not heavy with humiliation, but calm, strong, full of promise. I thought of the faces I had seen, the words whispered to me, the hands that had clasped mine with gratitude. For years I had believed I was alone in my suffering. Tonight proved otherwise. The truth once spoken had power far beyond my own story. Perhaps that was Ernest's final gift to me, not just this farm, but the lesson that silence is not survival. Dignity must be defended, even if it costs you everything. I looked out over the darkened fields, the mango tree rising tall against the starlit sky. Under its branches, humiliation had turned into truth, and truth into healing. The Carter Foundation would begin here. A promise not just for me, but for every mother, every father, every forgotten soul who had been silenced in their own homes. It would be a beacon for the invisible, a shield for the disrespected, a reminder that respect is never optional. The night air was cool against my skin as I whispered into the stars, "This is only the beginning." And for the first time in decades, I felt no fear of tomorrow. Only strength, only purpose.